Hello and welcome to part 4 of PowerCards 101. Today we're going to talk about two features of the Roll20 chat server, attribute substitution syntax, at least that's what I call it, and roll queries. And these are both features, as I said, of the Roll20 chat server itself and are not directly related to PowerCards, but they are features we can use to vastly increase the utility and flexibility of the PowerCards we create. So let's jump right over into the game and take a look at what these two features are. So if we open up a character sheet, we can see we have all kinds of attributes related to this character. And my video capture software doesn't show it, but if I hover over most of these attributes, I get a little pop-up window that gives me the name of the attribute. So that's the easiest way to find them if you're looking for them on your own. But two caveats. First of all, obviously you can't see it in my capture here. And second, not all the attributes will have that hover over. So what you can do to find the attributes you're looking for is go to the Attributes tab, and then this huge long list of dozens and dozens and dozens of attributes is everything the character sheet knows about this character. And we can retrieve any of these values and we will get what's in this first text field. So let's go ahead and show how this works. Let's close this down and hop over to our chat window, and we're going to say we have a character selected, which lets us use a special keyword. So we'll start with the @ symbol, and then in curly brackets we're going to do our keyword selected, which tells Roll20 that we're interested in the attributes of the character we currently have selected on the tabletop, and then a vertical bar, and then the name of the attribute we want to look up. In this case, we're going to say character underscore name. And when we hit enter, what will be returned to the chat window is simply the name of the character we had selected. Now, there's a slight complication in Roll20 that a token can either represent a character or can just be a graphical object. And we can get attributes in both cases. So if I open up this character's token properties, I can see the character name and the token name are the same thing. So if I go here and I say, instead of character name, say token name, I get the same name as I got from character name. Where that becomes important, though, is if we have a token like this Ruins token that doesn't represent a character, so it's a generic token, and I try and retrieve its token name, I'll be just fine. Selected token name, Ruins. However, if I try and retrieve its character name, I'm going to get an error from Roll20 telling me that it couldn't find a character for what I have selected. And the text that actually gets returned by Roll20 based on that chat entry is whatever you had in curly brackets. And that'll become important because anytime you try to retrieve an attribute that doesn't exist, so let's do selected luck bonus, which I know is not a 5th edition attribute on this character, we'll get a slightly different error, and we'll get that whatever we typed in there returned to the chat window. And so the error we get now is no attribute was found for @selected luck bonus. And the reason that could be important in your power card is if you're trying to retrieve, say, the luck bonus and use it as part of an inline roll, instead of saying, 1d20 plus 5 for your luck bonus, it's going to return 1d20 plus selected luck bonus, which obviously is not a roll that Roll20 can figure out what to do with, so it's going to cause problems with your card. It's probably going to return an error to the chat window from the API, and things will go sideways. So let's take a look at how we can use this notation in a power card. So I'm going to pop open a notepad window. I know in the past I've done all this right inside the macro window in Roll20, but there's not a lot of space in there, and I want to kind of open it up so we can see what's going on. So it's a pretty basic card, just has a name. We're going to add an emote to it. And if you remember from previous episodes, an emote is essentially a description of the action that takes place or shows in the power card above the title bar. So we can use our new selected character name, which will be substituted with the name of the character we have selected, attacks, and then selected is not the only thing we can use as a keyword in here. Let's say target. So target is a new keyword that whenever we use it, Roll20 will pop up a prompt window asking us to select a target. So target character name. All right, so that's pretty straightforward. Let's copy that and go back to our game. Make sure we have our character selected. Paste it into the chat window. And now here you see the target, choose target pop up. So we'll target the lion. And now in the chat window, here's our emote line above the title bar. And we see our first replacement value and our second replacement value. So it's important to note that from Roll20 or from PowerCards standpoint, there is absolutely no difference between that line and that line. This substitution happens at the chat server when the macro is clicked or pasted in the chat window or however you get it there. And PowerCards never sees anything about the selected, the target notation, any of that stuff, or the character, the attributes you retrieved. It doesn't know anything about that. It gets the literal text, Odug, Utatis, attacks lion. So in reality, PowerCards never sees this. What it actually sees is this. That's not usually all that important, but it does introduce a limitation when we talk about templates in PowerCards that because the chat server doesn't process the content of a template, the chat server notation and indeed role queries, when we get to talking about those, are not available in a template. So let's just expand this real quick. If you remember, we can include tokens for the character and the target in the emote line by using the char ID tag and selected character ID. And the target is target underscore list target token ID. All right, and that's the reason those are different. It's just a quirk of the way things were originally developed. I'm not the original author of PowerCards, but you know, these features get built over time and things are not always completely consistent. So let's pop back over into the game, paste this in and select our target. And now we see the left side, the wizard's icon, and the right side has the lion's icon. And all that with substitution based on chat notation. So let's make a little change here. Let's talk about role queries. So a role query uses a very similar notation to the chat server replacement syntax, but instead of an @ sign, we start with a question mark, essentially meaning we're going to ask a question. And also in curly brackets, we decide, or we put the prompt that's going to ask the user for information. So, you know, what spell level? And we put a vertical bar after the question, and then we can put a default value for our answer. So we'll put 1 there. And what this is going to do is pop up a, oh, I still have my notepad window up, there we go. What this is going to do is pop up a dialog box that's going to ask us what spell level we want to use. So I enter that, we get this input value box, and the 1 is filled in for us automatically. And I could say I want to cast this as a 5th level spell. And what gets returned to the chat window is the result of what I put into the box. Now it's important to note here, again, just like with the chat substitution that comes back with selected luck bonus as the return result. If I use this kind of input box where I'm just supplying a default value and asking the user to type something in, they don't have to type in a number. They could say my highest spell level, and if they go ahead and hit submit, what gets returned is my highest spell level, which again, if you're trying to use that in a dice roll, is not going to be all that useful. So we have a couple ways around this, and the most common is instead of just letting the user type something in, let's create a drop-down list. And we do that by putting in all of our choices separated by vertical bars. So now when I run this, I'll get the pop-up window again, but this time instead of a text box for me to enter something, I get a drop-down window where I can only select the values that I typed in as part of the question. So that's very useful. And the alternative, one of the other things we can do is instead of specifying that that number is what gets returned, let's change this up a little bit, and instead of weapon type, so instead of selecting a spell level, let's select a weapon type. So we'll do dagger, longsword, and quarterstaff. And again, if I hit enter on here, I'll get a drop down list of those three items, and whatever I pick gets returned to the chat window. But I can also do something like this. If I put a comma and then another value after the prompt word, so 1d4, comma 1d8, and comma 1d6. What'll happen now is I'll still get the same prompt window with the same values listed, but the return result to the chat window will be whatever was after the comma. So 1d6 instead of quarterstaff. Run that again and pick something dagger. 1d4 instead of dagger. So you can see that might be useful when rolling damage, to have the user select what kind of weapon they attacked with and the damage that it dealt. And one quirky feature of roll queries is that you can use a roll query value multiple times as long as you use the same question. It's not as useful as it might be because you can't get different values out of it. I can't say the same question, dagger, and something else besides the 1d4. But I can say you are going to deal, and then I can say weapon type and leave off all the choices, and it will take the roll query that the roll query that I just entered and put the same value in. So if I pick longsword, I'll see the d8 at the front, and you're going to deal 1d8. And it didn't prompt me a second time to pick the weapon type. It just reused that choice later in the chat. Now that does not mean that I could do simply weapon type here without any choices, because that it doesn't have a memory of what you did before. So you can't do it on multiple chat entries, but anything that happens in the same chat entry will maintain that value all the way through. And PowerCards are entered as a single chat line, so they can take advantage of that feature. So let's hop back over to our notepad window and expand our PowerCard a bit. And I'm going to do this mostly for demonstration purposes, but let's go ahead and make an attack. And our standard D20, or sorry, not D20, 5th edition attack is 1d20 plus, and we'll use our substitution notation again, selected strength mod because you add your strength modifier, plus selected PB, which stands for proficiency bonus, and that is actually the name of the attribute on the character sheet for 5e. And close up our roll, and let's go ahead and think back to last episode and add a roll ID so we can maintain that value for use later. Versus armor class, and then we'll retrieve the target NPC AC. And in an NPC character sheet for the 5e character sheet, NPC AC is the armor class value that is available and correct. Player characters use AC, but that may either not be available or may be incorrect on an NPC character sheet. And finally, we'll use the formatting we learned in the last video to make that look like it's a roll, even though it's just a value. So let's copy this, go back to our game, paste it, and pick the line again. And oh, I used a $sign instead of an @ so that's a bug. That should be an @ sign. So copy that, go back in, paste it, and we see attack of 4, he bumbled, versus armor class of 12 for the lion. But we're not really doing anything with that yet. Let's go back over to our notepad window and say, let's create a line. We're not going to, on a regular card, maybe we wouldn't display this, but we're going to create a weapon damage line, and we're going to say damage type is, and then we're going to create something similar to the roll query we did before. Weapon type, and we're going to say dagger 1d4, longsword 1d8, and quarterstaff 1d6. So that way, when we run this card, it'll prompt us for the weapon we want to use, and it'll store the answer in the roll query weapon type. It's going to output it to the line here, but we'll use it later. So let's say, let's create a conditional now, and we'll say, and we're not going to get into critical hits and all that in this card, just to keep things simple. If your attack is greater than or equal to, and then we can use our notation here because it's just going to get substituted with a number by the chat server. Target NPC AC. So if we have a attack roll greater than or equal to the target's armor class, we hit. You deal, and then we can say start a roll, and remember that we have either 1d4, 1d8, or 1d6 in the roll query weapon type. So we can simply substitute that into the content of our roll. Just for completeness, if the attack is less than target NPC AC, miss. Your attack missed. Alright, so let's copy this out. And I know I've been using our wizard there, but he does not have a great melee attack, and this will illustrate another nice option here. So I selected our fighter, paste in our macro, and it asks us for a target, pick the lion, I get asked what type of weapon, so that's the roll query popping up and asking what we want to use for our weapon. And what we see is now everything has changed to reflect this new selected character, which is nice because now that macro would theoretically work for any character we wanted to attack with. So we see the thing where it asks us what the weapon was, and it gives us the damage type as 1d8. We attacked, we rolled a 23 to hit versus an armor class 12. So we hit, and we see the 1d8 was transferred down here to see how much damage we dealt. So that's how we can use a roll query to modify inline what we were doing. And there are, of course, you could do things slightly differently and take that instead of returning a damage dice, we could return the string, and then we could try and compare that in a conditional, and then have a bunch of different damage possibilities based on the name of the weapon. But that's usually better done with some more advanced features of replacements and templates. So this really, roll queries and chat substitution, as you can see, let us make very generic cards. So anybody could run this. Any character can run it. It will prompt for the weapon type and a target, and it'll output the damage. Now, obviously, this would not be a realistic card to use in a game because people can attack with more than those 3 weapon types. But I just wanted to illustrate how the roll query works, and bring up the importance of the fact that reusing the same question will just output the value that was entered the first time and not prompt the user again. And that pretty much covers the chat server syntax and roll queries. I will see you back here in episode 5 when the plan is to talk about visual and audio effects in a PowerCard. So, thank you for watching.